It's Don here from the board. Thanks for coming along and checking out this video. So today's video is actually going to be kind of a combined dual video, and as you've probably seen from the title, part of it is going to be looking at how you should examine and look at a second-hand keyboard if you're buying one, and it's also going to be kind of a partial review of the Deck 87 Francium keyboard. Now, how this came about is I actually purchased a Deck Francium keyboard second-hand, and when I initially did this video, I came across a couple of different things, and I thought, this would be a really good way to have an example of actually what you should look for and check out when you receive a second-hand keyboard that you buy. Now, I actually got screwed over a little bit by Windows 10 when it did a software update, because it did the update the day before I recorded the video and it messed all of my microphone settings up. So I only realized that because I did a couple of videos, and that was actually inclusive of my last video that I released, which was the hub keycap one. And people gave me a lot of feedback saying that the audio was really soft and it was really muted. Now, I know you're probably saying, don't you watch your videos afterwards to check that the quality and everything is fine? And yes, I do. But because I use closed headphones and I do a lot of that kind of stuff because, my family and whatnot, it actually didn't sound too bad. I mean, I figured it sounded a little bit soft, but I didn't think it was actually really, really muted. And it just might be because of my mixer settings. So after I released it and people said, hang on a moment, like that was really, really soft compared to normal, that's when I discovered that a lot of my microphone and audio settings in that Windows update had gone completely out of whack. So since then, I've spent a bit of time sorting them out, fixing them, and I'm back doing this video to sort of go over again, but now I've got a better idea of what's happened and I've had a chance to actually talk to the seller. So I'll go through some of those points as we go along. Now, so going to switch over onto the desktop, and here we go. So one of our local folks here in Sydney was selling this, and they put it up for $35, which I was like, it's an absolute bargain. But there's some things that were not quite right with it. So they were very upfront as part of their listing that it was missing the top cover of the case. They'd taken the case off to customize it, to mod it, big truck going by, and they'd spray painted it. They didn't want to include it because the paint was coming off and it didn't look very good, and so that was part of the reason why the price had come down. They had also explicitly said that one of the screws was missing from the actual attachment to the case, and that was fine. I didn't have a problem with that. They only had really one or two pictures that weren't super high quality, a little bit out of focus, wasn't very well lit, but looking at it, I was okay with that, especially for the price of $35. Now, I was interested in buying this simply because, one, I don't have a deck, two, I don't have a MX Switch 10 keyless. I have only my Nova Touch, which is a top ray 10 keyless. So it was a good opportunity for me to pick up one cheap, and I have some plans for this, to be honest. So let's have a quick look at what I managed to get. Came in the actual box that they purchased it in, which is fantastic, was in really good condition. We can see it's got blue MX switches. They're meant to be cherries, designed in the USA. Good solid box, nice and simple. There's a serial over there. Doesn't really need to be focused in or anything like that though. Nothing around the sides. On the back, some fonts, USB 2, full N key, cherry switches, 50mm, pretty simple. So let's start getting into this actual keyboard. Now, when I first recorded this, I actually weighed it, and it came out to be 700 grams or so from memory. I'm not going to bother doing that now, but the weight isn't accurate because it's not the full case. So there will be additional weight because of the fact that it's going to have a case plate on top. So this is exactly how it presented to me because I haven't done anything else except put it back in the box. First thing that is really glaring and was part of the initial pictures was the fact that there is this weird ground strap. But we'll get to that. And there was a bit of damage and scratching around that screw, which was also seen and documented from pictures, and the other screw that actually holds that top plate to the bottom case is missing from over here. So that's fine. Let's just pop it out and we can keep going. Sorry, I just bumped the microphone there. My apologies if anyone had an eardrum issue. Okay. Right, yeah. You're going to come back into focus? There we go. Alright, so this is a deck, Francium 87, 10 keyless, and it's missing the top cover. Well, now you can see here that we still have the bottom of the actual case. The deck itself has some cable routing, but it's not a detachable cable. We've got some flip out legs, and it's got some rubber around the edges. The outside is plastic. Now if I do a flex test, it's not really going to be very representative because it is missing the case, but it's very, very solid. And the reason why it's very solid is because it actually has a metal plate here. The front of it, you can see where the actual top plate would have clipped in, and it was disclosed to me that the keycaps on it were not going to be the stock keycaps. So these are actually IKBC keycaps and not the ones that originally came with it. So what do we look for when we start getting into a second-hand keyboard? Obviously, you want to check for signs of damage. You want to see that there's no, obvious signs of damage. So by inspecting around the outside of the case, I don't see any major chips missing from it. I don't see any major scratches or impact damage indicating that the board has been dropped. Now, why does that matter? Obviously, if you drop the keyboard, you're going to have shock damage, which can dislodge components. It can break solder contacts. It can damage standoffs and mounting points and things like that. But overall, it looks pretty good, looks pretty clean. Now, looking at the bottom of the case, this one's not so much of an issue because there's no warranty screws involved. You'll find some products will often have a sticker that says warranty is void if sticker is broken. That's typically because you need to actually punch through that to access the screws to take it apart. This one you don't have to worry about that because you can just spudge open the actual top and get to the screws, which is exactly what's happened here. There's really nothing else going on under here. There's like a sprue mark under that sticker that I can feel, but I know that there's no screws involved. Okay. It's got a good heft to it because of the steel plate. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. And it's meant to have cherry blues. You can hear the clicking there. Maybe if I'll just drop the microphone. It's pretty standard, as you can expect. And of course, if I take some of those keycaps off, you can see there's the blue. If I take off a stabilized key, you'll also see that it's got plate mount stabilizers on. And while I'm there is that really weird, mysterious ground strap to the plate. I've never seen that before. Now, if I tilt that up, you can see it literally goes to a silk screen which says GND, which is ground. Yeah, so strange, so many questions. What I do find really interesting here is there's actually these parts here. Okay, there's these two bits here. It's not focusing. There we go. Where you can put LEDs, and if you tilt up the actual PCB, you can see that there's some text above it. Now it's not focusing very well because it's focusing on the caps, but the one on the left-hand side says caps and the other one says scroll lock. So it's interesting that they actually have them positioned, but they are not actually installed. If I restore this so I don't lose my keycaps, not that they're stock anyway, and I go over to caps lock, there is actually a LED there. And there is also another hole in the actual plate and a LED section on the PCB below to support what looks to be, another caps lock indicator. So It's interesting how they've done that design, but it's a, I suppose, designed for but not fitted with kind of approach. Okay, now where do we go from here? So everything at a very cursory glance seems to be okay. Now they probably gave it a little bit of a clean. I haven't cleaned it in between when I did the first video and now, but there is still some dust and grime, just general wear and tear. If I am a barbarian and I take that straight off the bat there, you can kind of see that there's sort of particulate and just fine debris matter that is just kind of sitting around under the space bar. And to be honest, that's relatively normal, but it is all throughout the rest of the keyboard. But hey, what I am noticing about the quality of this build is that there's a lot of defects on the paintwork on this steel plate. There's patches here which have been touched up. It's rough and it's slightly bubbly. So, you know, probably wasn't a very good paint job, and bits that had flaked or fallen off during assembly or manufacture, they'd probably just touched up with some paint. Now, keep that in mind because I will get back to that very, very shortly. I don't know how long they've had this keyboard. I also don't know if they bought it new. I think they told me that they'd bought it new, but I'm sorry, I completely forgot because it has been a little while since I had that conversation. So, let us open it up internally to check it, to see what other things that we should be looking for. So everything seems to be all well and good. I'm going to take out the single screw that it has. It's come out, but it hasn't come out. There we go. There's that single screw. Make sure we don't lose it. And, whoa. That sounded really bad, but it just popped off. Okay. And lift. Now, I can't feign surprise because I've already opened this and I know what's happened down here. But the first thing that struck me when I recorded this the first time is this. There is evidence of corrosion here. Now, I'm just going to unjack this. Hopefully I can do it without damaging anything. Come on. Oh, hurting myself. There we go. Rightio. So, straight off the bat, there is evidence of corrosion in at least 3 spots. It's very, very distinct. There is also rust residue and debris all along the bottom of this case edge. Now, the dust and whatnot that's fallen in through between the keycaps and whatnot, I'm not too fussed about it, but there is spot residues that actually indicate a liquid spill. I spoke with the seller of this after I did the first video, and they claimed that they have not had a spill. Now, of course, it's entirely up to me whether I choose to believe that or not. And to be honest, I have no reason to believe or not to believe the seller. I don't know them well enough, and they're not exactly somebody who's been in the community for very long and has a reputation or anything of that nature. I'm not calling them a liar, but it may be even as simple as that either somebody else has had a spill and they didn't know about it and they weren't told about it, or they might even live in an environment that is actually really, really high humidity. High humidity conditions is not unusual in Australia, especially if they live, in a coastal area, which the entire city technically is a coastal city. So it's a little bit worrying, because if they've said that they've not had a spill, where did this damage come from? Is it damage from the factory, and the factory has not disclosed that at all? But the box isn't damaged, so it couldn't have been damaged in transit. It's an absolute mystery. Now, the cable run here is just a bit of plastic that holds it into place. You can probably pop that out with a little bit of effort if you wanted to. And I suppose if you wanted to do a bit of a mod and change it into a removable detachable cable, you probably could as well. Now, I didn't show the other end of the cable, but it's nothing special. It's a pretty generic connector, not gold plated or anything like that, just a standard USB-A. So it is braided, it's got a good stiffness about it, it's medium quality, no other further comments. So that's the first thing that I noticed straight off the bat. So you want to check if you've had spills. Now, if the listing said it's had spills, fantastic, it correlates, it's fine. If the listing didn't mention it at all and you find this, you would have the right to be upset. You would have the right to be angry and say, hey, like, there is potential issues that this keyboard's going to have further down in its life, especially if it's clear as day that there is corrosion that has occurred. Now, my Magis Touch 1 that I bought a very long time ago now, several years ago now, had spills that I was not told about either, and it actually ultimately led to the demise of that keyboard. So, looking at the actual PCB itself, now noticing this is actually flipped. Okay, so this is the correct orientation. So this edge, this leading edge here now is where that case damage was, and I flip it over, the damage is up here. There's the big spot there, and then there's some more spots over here. So I'm gonna turn that around. Now this is gonna be mirrored because this damage here is actually the right-hand corner, and then this damage here is on the left-hand corner. So let's have a look at the big spot. And if I bring it up, you can see that mark, that watermark, that corrosion mark, that oxidation mark. And not only does it cover the actual pins of the switch, because you can see how nice and bright and shiny these ones are over here, and then these are actually all dull, and that's because the soldering has corroded. The diode, okay, the diode, if it'll focus for me, it has oxide powder on it. It has actually corroded so much that it looks like how your car lead batteries get that powdery look on it. Like, that is not fresh, brand new damage, okay? The bottom of the plate here itself has rust marks and corrosion on it. So if we zip across onto the other side, similarly so, luckily, there are no other components over here, but the shininess of that solder is gone. It's evident that there is corrosion and oxidation on those actual pins, and you can even see where it's left the residue on the plate. And as we move along here, you'll see there's little spots of brown, and if I flip it side on now, you can see where there's these rust spots, and they happen along the edge of this front plate. So where does that leave me? Now, if they said that there was no spills and it was in perfect condition and you got that, man, you would be cheesed, right? You would be like, that's not cool. And heck, like, I can look at the stabilizer bar. It's probably a bit hard to see through the gap here, but that stabilizer bar also has rust spots on it. That is like, it's pretty serious. Pretty serious. Now, I'm not going to get upset at the seller. 35 bucks, look, it's not a big deal, okay? But if you went and bought a keyboard and it was like this and you paid a lot more for it and you were promised that it was in top-notch condition, then yes, you probably have grounds to go back to them and say, oh, what is up with that? Now, the ground strap is entertaining. Now, well, sorry, let me just backtrack. Everything else seems fine. Everything else is clean. The joints all seem to be there. The components don't seem to be damaged. And if I go and find, where is it? The holes relating. So there's the two holes there, right? That I said was the caps lock and the scroll lock. You'll see that they're super clean as well, which means they were never factory installed with an LED and the seller decided to desolder them. Now, why would you do that? I don't know, as in to desolder it, but I can say that for sure it came factory like that. So no issues whatsoever. And similarly, over here, there is the two holes for the LED for the caps lock. Once again, not there because the factory never installed them, not the seller desoldering them. So all well and good. Right. So besides those corrosion and rust marks, there's nothing to lead me to believe that this keyboard wouldn't work. So we will plug it in a moment and we'll be able to show that and check that. But before we get to that though, I want to just show you a bit more of this front plate, if it'll focus. It's not showing it very well, but there is heaps of paint bubbling and defects, both around where those rust spots are and where there are no rust spots. So the quality of this actual plate, that steel plate that they've got, the coverage of the paint job is really, really poor, especially on some of those thinner edges like around here. It's very splotchy and it has been touched up. Now I'm not going to pull out my multimeter to do it, but I did continuity checks, and I did continuity checks from the ground strap to the plate, and I found some really interesting things. It doesn't do anything. The actual plate is painted, so by normal contact, unless if you actually touch the screw, which is exposed and not insulated at all, you're not actually getting any grounding. So I'm not 100% sure what's going on there. Now, because it's a keyboard, it also should just be a USB 5 volt device. You're not going to get zapped by 5 volts to the point where it's going to like kill you. Super unlikely. Even if it was running at its maximum ampage, if you were typing on it and it got wet and you touched it, like, what's the likelihood? Seriously, what is the likelihood it is going to run across your chest and provide you enough milliamps to kill you? Insane. But some electrical engineer who probably doesn't really understand what's going on here was told, let's make this thing electrically safe, and just whack that on. Now, what I did find really interestingly was when I put my test probe against the ground strap here, and I was touching the switches, trying to figure out if it was even conducting to the switches, there was nothing happening to the switches until I got past the switches through one of the gaps next to the stabilizers, the shift stabilizer actually to be precise, and there was continuity. And I went, what? Why is the stabilizer conducting? And then I realized it wasn't the stabilizer because I was a lot more careful as I started probing around, but it was actually the edges of the holes in the plate that it was conducting. So once again, it's where paint has come off and exposed bare metal, which has caused the conducting. So anywhere else that I tested and touched, it was not conducting. Why do we have this strap? Maybe another electrical engineer who actually has some knowledge will be able to tell me, but I do not know. Okay, so let's just reseat that. And let's plug it in and check it out. Now I do have on my monitor, well, it'll be that way on the video, but sorry, just bumped the microphone again. But I do have something set up on that side that I'll switch to very shortly, and we'll be able to check it out, and we'll sort of go from there. So we had a blue light that flashed on over here. The thing that's really interesting is F11 and F12 here actually are not F11 and F12 by default natively. This particular keyboard has some weird design layout in it. So what I'm going to do is, let's go to the monitor. So I've got switch hitter over here. I've got Notepad open, and then I've also got a copy of the manual from online. And what we can see here is you got F9, F10, and then there is F11 as a secondary, and then a PN thing. That squiggly thing I think is meant to be the macros. Okay, so we'll go to switch header and we'll start hitting some switches. Now, I'm not going to hit F11 yet. Well, I just hit F12, nothing's happened there. Because obviously it's not actually hooked up to F12. All my other functions seem to be... Now, it's not uncommon at all for the function key on the right-hand side next to control and under shift to not be menu, okay? Because it's registering as a function key, not as a menu key. So, as promised by the seller, everything is actually working as it should be. Now, let me just show. So the actual caps lock LED lights up as it should, and scroll lock does as well. Now, of course, insert here is registering as print screen. Sorry, my bad. Just had a mental blank there because that was kind of flipped around. So let's just swap that around and make sure that it's in the right spot. Now, I can't remember if they had done that or if I'd done that as part of the last time I recorded this, so don't make any comments about that. Not necessarily reflective of the seller. So keyboard's still plugged in, and now so we saw on switch header just then everything was perfectly fine. But when I first got this and I was doing the first video, I started in the top row where escape is. Hang on. Where escape is, and I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then nothing happened. I went, oh, okay, 11 and 12 aren't working, but 11 lit up. So if I, so you'll see the light under 11 has lit up, and I had no idea what the heck was going on. So I just kept hitting switches, and then I got down to the bottom row, and I went Control Win Alt space, and it went bam. Look at that chatter straight off the mark. And I thought, oh wow, there's a lot of issues here with this switch because it's a damaged switch. You know, they should have mentioned that, and you, of course, once again would have the right to be upset about it, but they didn't say anything to me. And I thought it was actually a defective switch, a switch that had massive amounts of chatter. And then I went on to do what I'm about to show you, which was just a type test. So, you know, this is a deck Francium. And if you look at the space, so this is a space bar, there is this entire gap, and that was how bad I thought the actual chatter was. And I was just completely flabbergasted about that. Why would they not mention that there was such a big problem with the spacebar switch? Maybe that was why they were selling it. Maybe that's why it was really cheap, and it just completely forgot about it because they weren't actually using this keyboard actively. They just shelved it and went, you know what, this thing's busted, I'm going to get rid of it cheap. So afterwards, because I'd realized that I needed to redo this video anyway, I went and contacted the seller and I asked them both about the spill and what's up with the spacebar. And then they told me it's not chatter, it's because of the F11 key. So the F11 key is actually the macro key. And what they had done accidentally was they'd programmed a macro for the spacebar to be a repeat of like a lot of characters. So now that I've turned off the F11, okay, I'm going to go back to the right monitor, and once again I'm going to type, this is the space bar without macro. It works perfectly fine. But they forgot about it. They didn't tell me about it, and had I not gone to ask them about it, I would have probably been really offended. And I can imagine that people in the community, if they got really upset about it, they get all pitchforky, they didn't contact the seller, and they were like, you know, this guy sucks, I'm not going to try and make it right. And they could go on and start slandering and, you know, name bashing and all that kind of stuff, or talking about people behind their back. And so this is why you have to ask questions. Because now that I know that it's actually a macro, in theory, if I go back to my manual and I go down here and it tells me programming, restore to factory default, press and hold function plus R. The LED is going to flash 3 seconds. Continue to hold it until the LED flashes 9 times. We'll take it back. So my function and R key, just going to make sure that I get that right. I'm going to roll in there. So there is function right next to control instead of the menu key. So, and then of course my normal R, we should see a flashing LED somewhere. So function R, we got some flashing. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No more. Okay, so now that should have reset all of the macros on this keyboard. I didn't want to do it and test it before because then I wouldn't have had the opportunity to actually show you this fantastic repeating spacebar macro. Now, of course, the manual has a lot of detail in regards to programming instructions and delays and stuff like that. I'm not going to bother trying to program the keyboard, but here we go. So normal typing, and it seems to be working. If I switch back across and I turn on F11, and then I go back to my right monitor, this is normal typing. Bam, fixed. Okay, so much happier about the spacebar. No chatter that I can tell, because if I go back to switch header, let me just clear that. Fantastic. Okay, so what have we learned? When you check a used keyboard, make sure up front you ask what its condition's like. Don't just look at pictures, because I didn't ask up front and say, has it had any spills? Has it had any drops? Has it had any other damages? Any of the keys not working? I didn't ask any of that, right? You would think that being in this hobby and having bought a lot of secondhand keyboards, because I have, I probably should have, but it was such a bargain basement price that I didn't even think about it. And I probably should, even if it is cheap, okay? Because then you know the baseline of what you're expecting. When you get it and you check it, if you find any problems, go back and have that communication. Ask them, talk to them, find out if it was just something that had skipped their mind, like this spacebar, okay? Had I not done that, and I decided to just, vent my spleen about it, then it probably would have generated a lot more bad blood unnecessarily. Now, the only thing here is that they really scratched up around the screw there for no real reason. And of course, there's a missing screw, but I can get a replacement screw for that. Not a problem. And of course, I could probably even undo that and desolder it if it annoyed me enough, which for the moment, I'm going to leave it because it's kind of funny. It really is. It really is. So there you go. Check outside condition, drops, scratches, damages, cracks. Open it up, take it apart, check it for corrosion. Check it for things that might have been desoldered and resoldered if you have concerns that there was issues with it. Now, if it's a board that's been heavily modified, they've done switch swaps, they've taken switches out so they can lube them because the plate cutout doesn't allow you to do that. These are the kind of details that you should ask and think about when buying, as well as when inspecting, to ensure that you have the clear picture. And like I said before, so many times in this video, communicate, communicate, communicate. Rightio. Now, final impressions of a deck Francium. It feels good. It's solid. The keys sound nice. They're cherry blues, and I like cherry blues. I like clickies. Keycaps, they're not stock. Can't really give you a good impression. Am I going to do a sound sample? It's not really a great representation, simply because 1, they're not stock keycaps, 2, we're missing the top plate. So it actually doesn't even sound like the way that a brand new one of these would sound. But just for completeness, let's go ahead and do that anyway. So it sounds actually really great because it has a solid tone. There's a bit of hollowness to it with these keycaps, which are quite thin, just IKBCs from wherever, generic or another keyboard, I don't know. And of course, cherry blues, clickies. There you have it. Now, I did say I'm going to do something with this keyboard. I'm actually going to completely strip it apart anyway, so I'm going to be desoldering switches on this before I do what it is that I want to do with it. It's probably the first time I'm going to be modding. I'm not going to say it's heavily modded, but I will be doing some fun with this keyboard because I can, and because I picked it up so cheap. The worst case scenario is if I kill it, if I screw it up somehow, then I get to harvest some switches. So, and more switches, cherry switches. Oh, crap. I forgot it was plugged in. Reliable switches, and I can't imagine that it would have used up its 50 million keystroke lifecycle anyway. So thank you very much for coming along and checking out the video. I do apologize a little bit about the length. Obviously I ranted a lot here, but both looking at the keyboard and looking at how you should check out keyboards when buying them secondhand. Now if you like this video, of course, please hit like. If you've somehow come across this video and you're not a subscriber, please hit subscribe. We are currently floating around the 1740 subscribers. Of course, like I said many times now, it's going to be a long stretch, but when we hit 2,000, I'm going to be giving away 2 artisans courtesy of Coscaps and Jolly Green Giant. So make sure you share this with your friends as well if you want us to get to that giveaway goal even quicker. Now, if you're completely new to this and you also aren't aware, we've got a podcast which is called The Board Podcast, funnily enough, and links description below. You can also check out our Patreon and join us on Slack. All you have to do is just send me an email at theboardpodcast@gmail.com for an invite. So thank you again for coming along and checking out this video. And of course, as usual, until next time, happy clacking.